Your first chapter, you need to hook your audience with it, and you also need to introduce your character and your settings. Here are 6 tips to improve it. Hey everybody, welcome to the Other Epic Story vlog. This is the show where I, Elliot, talk about tips and tricks, writing and editing tips and tricks, and apply it to my own work, which is a trilogy, a dystopian trilogy. If you want to hear a reading from my first chapter, I supply a link to it right up here. I recommend clicking it, checking it out, maybe after you watch this. Then I'll fill in the blanks if you haven't already. Also, go ahead and hit subscribe. Alright, so tip number 1, know what point your story starts. Are you starting with something interesting that is happening, or are you starting by easing the reader into it, like a regular day kind of setup? Or is it right in the middle of an action scene and this is like a moment of intensity that the character has to go through? It's up to you to decide how you want to play with that first chapter. There's no right or wrong way, but in terms of how your whole story flows, knowing where you begin your first chapter is really important. So in my first chapter, I begin the story just by setting up the lifestyle of this town, Jin, and talking about how tough existence is like. I want to really set the tone that these people do not live an extravagant life. These people are peasants, they're farmers, they're tradesmen, they're not intelligent in any particular way in terms of growing a society. I do begin with like an average everyday sort of story, but I sort of add this part about the troubles they're having, especially the annual event where this creature comes and steals their food, which they work so hard for. So that's how my story begins. I'm setting up like an everyday kind of scenario, and in the back of these characters' minds, it's like, oh no, this creature's coming to steal our food. That sucks. Tip number 2, don't be too flowery or descriptive with your words. You might want to try to impress everybody with your wordsmithery, if that's a word, which I think it is because I'm a wordsmith myself. But chapter 1 really isn't the best place to do it. We usually get caught up with describing too much of the character or describing too much of the setting. You don't really need to do that. The actions of the character will, in a way, be better to showcase their characteristics as opposed to you just describing this and that from them. Take this passage from my novel, for example. I get too caught up with just describing my main character at this time, Bernard Barnwell, and I should just let his actions with the community and with his wife do the sort of the talking for me. But I didn't, and I went ahead and just told you everything, and that's not really quality writing. Tip number 3, have a main character to follow. It's pretty important for the readers to know whose storyline we're going to be following right at the beginning. You could switch characters later on in chapter 2, chapter 3, whatever, but right at the start, and if you're following like a linear storyline, it's kind of helpful that the main character is projected as like, alright, this is the guy we're gonna be following the story about. And I kind of do that in my first chapter, but I also kind of switch perspective at one point. So my story begins with me describing town and then Bernard Barnwell, and then it flashes back, and then all of a sudden the perspective switched to his wife, Cassandra, and then the rest of the chapter unfolds. I don't know if that's the best way to do it. Tip number 4, way too much backstory. Chapter 1, it's easy to get caught up with wanting to give your reader all the details that they need, but in doing so, you sort of pull away from the actual storyline itself, and it becomes overwhelming and a little boring, to be honest. So I don't recommend doing that. I did it in my first chapter, and it's glaringly clear. I try to explain a bit of the social construct of the town, and then I explain a bit about like how marriages work in this society, and then I flash back, and then there's way too much going on, and I kind of wished I just followed like a more clear storyline and have the details of the town reveal itself when necessary. Tip number 5, don't trick your readers. Don't start a story as a simulation or a dream. There's no reason to. You want to leave a bit of mystery, and you want to misdirect the readers at time, but you don't want to use a lazy technique like that. It just loses your reader's trust kind of right away. Don't do it. Just don't do it. Tip number 6, the last tip of the day. Ask yourself, can the first chapter stand alone as a short story? Just forget all the rest of the stuff. Just have the first chapter, read it, ask yourself, are you completely satisfied with it? Is there a little arc that happens? It could end with a cliffhanger, but is there a little arc that happens? And if there is, then you have a solid first chapter. I don't think my first chapter has an arc. As I mentioned before, it kind of starts off with a bit of introduction of the setting and the character, and then it flashes back, and then it comes back forward, and then has a character perspective shift. How I think I could have improved my first chapter is by better understanding what is the story that is actually happening in the first chapter. And I believe most of that first chapter is about a wife and a husband wrapping up their work for the day, and the work taking longer for the wife, and the husband needing to just go home. I think the story of the first chapter perhaps should focus on Cassandra and on Cassandra's thoughts of her life, because she married into this lifestyle. Her father did not actually believe she could do this work, and I think all her life she's trying to, I guess, prove to the men around her that she's very capable of doing the work. I think that's it. I think that is what my chapter 1 should be about. Less about, the setting, or like all that stuff is in the background. I think the internal battle should be focused on Cassandra, and then when all the stuff at the end happens, it kind of, all that emotion kind of culminates together. Yeah, that's great. Oh, this is helpful. And I hope it helps you guys too with figuring out your first chapter. Once again, if you want to check out some more videos, I'll add some end cards here. Feel free to click on them. Check them out if you haven't already and you enjoy whatever this is. Please hit subscribe, and until next time, keep writing, keep believing in yourself, and even when no one is reading your work, do it for yourself. And that is the most important thing I'll say today. Alright, I'll leave you guys. Bye.